recognizing and acknowledging that we are on the lands of Victoria, Kaskaskia, Yankasha, Wea, Miami, Muscooten, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kikapu, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the last 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. Welcome. This semester, the University-wide is excited to be partnering with Diversity Ed for the entire Friday Forum Conversation Cafe Fall 2021 series, Unpacking Racism, What Are We Carrying? Just some quick announcements. Diversity Ed invites you to join us next Thursday evening, November 4th from 7 to 8 in the Psychology Building, room 32 for our last iJourney workshop entitled Not All Wounds Are Visible, Mental Health Stigma. From the University-wide Fred S. Bailey Scholarship Program provides over $200,000 in monetary support to U of I students. There are 4 different scholarships within the Bailey Scholarship Program and applications are open. For more information, check out their website or reach out to their student director at CLIA at the Y. Join us here again next week at the same time and place for our Friday Forum and Conversation Cafe to hear from staff and students from the Women's Resources Center and the University-Y discussing how anti-violence means anti-oppression.
Following that, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors that support this series. They are as follows. The Student Cultural Programming Fee, who provides lunch weekly, thank you to them. The Social Action Committee of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign, Women in Gender and Global Perspectives Program, Humanities Research Institute, LGBT Resource Center, Women's Resource Center, Education Justice Project, Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Office of the Provost, the Center for Global Studies, First Mennonite Church of Champaign-Urbana, Center for Advanced Study, Latino Studies, Illini Hillel, College of Fine and Applied Arts, and more. Today, I'm so happy to introduce our speaker, Catherine Shieh, who will be presenting today. Following her presentation, there will be a few minutes for Q&A. And if you are online, please submit your questions in the chat. If you're in person, there should be a question card on your seats, and you can jot down your questions and we will collect them periodically. Catherine Shieh is the Anti-Hate Training Coordinator at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. Prior to the role, the majority of her 5-year high school teaching career was in teaching ethnic studies. Her anti-bias and anti-racism curricula have been piloted in the Los Angeles Unified School District, as well as multiple charter schools across California. Before working as a teacher, Kat worked in nonprofit, public, higher education, and corporate consulting sectors, all dedicated to social impact. During her time working in the U.S. House of Representatives, she opened 2 congressional caucuses. Kat received her BA in Political Science and Urban Planning from the University of Southern California and received her MA in Urban Education, Administration, and Policy from Loyola Marymount University. Kat is an alum of America, Teach Plus, Association of Raza Educators, and Coro. I would like to hand it over to Kat at this time.
Very much, not only for Cynthia for making this a reality, but for so many different committees and so many different groups making this happen. I do want to acknowledge we are in hybrid mode, so you'll have to excuse us for some of the technical difficulties we might run through today. Give us a little bit of grace on that. But otherwise, welcome to the Bystander Intervention Training to Stop Anti-Asian, Anti-Asian American, and Xenophobic Harassment. And I just want to say, it looks like we have a pretty good turnout for both online as well as in person. And I want to thank you all for being here.
One moment, we're having technical difficulties. I'm so sorry about that. Could you reintroduce yourself?
Testing. Does this work?
Yes, that sounds great.
Yay, awesome. Okay, so I'll try this again. I just want to say thank you all so much for inviting me into this space and for all of the committees and people who made this happen. My name is Cat Shieh. As you know, she, her, hers. I'm the anti-hate training coordinator. Welcome to our bystander intervention training to stop anti-Asian American, and xenophobic harassment. It actually looks like we have quite a good turnout for both online as well as in person. So I'm excited to see what kind of conversations come up for us. We are here not only because of the work of the University YMCA and so many other student committees, but also because of 3 organizations, as you can see here on this screen. Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago, that's where I'm at. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our work, we're kind of like the NAACP of Asian Americans. We run and work on a variety of different policy issues. Some of this curriculum comes from Hollaback. They are a fully online anti-harassment training organization if you want to join some other trainings that they have to offer. And we're here because of the Council on American Islamic Relations Chicago. They're a Muslim civil rights and legal advocacy firm. Someone did ask me, how do I spell the speaker's name? Cat like the animal, and then Shieh, S-H-I-E-H. You need to record that for any particular reason. But I just really want to highlight that this is available because of the partnership of so many. I know that many of us are here today because we want to figure out what it means to actually be able to de-escalate situations of harassment. And I want to just couch us in this factoid very quickly. And that is the fact that almost 4 out of every 5 people say that it improved when someone helps them in a situation of harassment. That's what 79% means. Almost 4 out of every 5 folks say that it improved when someone helped in a situation of harassment. However, that's not the reality of what we're actually noticing here of all of the harassment situations. Only 1 out of every 4, someone actually is intervening. And I know you and I are here because we want to figure out what it actually means to close that gap. So we have just under an hour here together today. And what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what it means to safely intervene whenever we're noticing harassment happening, both out physically as well as online. The way that we're going to do that is through this agenda, as you can see here, in the pink font, the reflect and the learn piece, the first half of the training. That's really giving us sort of the historical context of where all of this harassment comes from. That anti-Asian hate isn't a pandemic-specific phenomenon, but the fact that this has always been here throughout the history of the United States. And then hopefully, with all that context, really, urges us into action to be able to use the 5 tools to de-escalate situations of harassment. And you're actually going to practice some of them yourself. If you are here in person, can you just please raise the cards that you were given when you first entered? Cool. All right, I see a couple people raising them. I'm glad that we have them. You are going to be using them in order for us to be participatory in the very end of this. So something that I want us to really reflect on here, this is our first mini lesson. This is where I'm talking about public spaces and how we all experience public spaces differently. This is not a new lesson for many of us, but it's good for us to be explicit about. Our identities and our experiences with harassment, they change the way that we calculate going through public space. Maybe your identities they're things you can't control, right? So maybe this means your disability status, your immigration status, your height, being gender non-conforming, sexuality, gender, maybe your race, your sex. There are so many other identities, by the way, that I haven't mentioned, right? They change what we perceive as going to be safe or unsafe for us in certain spaces. Same thing with harassment. If you've experienced harassment, if you know someone who's been harassed before, that's also going to kind of put you in a place where you're hyper aware, or maybe you don't notice anything at all. I know for myself, I was physically assaulted 4 years ago at a train station in Oakland. It was a very scary situation in which I was punched and kicked and knocked over, given death threats. I was attacked for being Asian. The man specifically targeted elderly and Asian women. I know how much that continues to change the way that I calculate what's safe or unsafe for me, right? And I also recognize that I tend to be on the more hyper aware, right? We all experience and calculate spaces differently. Maybe this means that we clutch our keys or our purse. Maybe this means that we avoid certain neighborhoods or only go on well-lit streets to travel. We don't like to travel alone. We don't like to go out at night. We prefer to take a bike versus a bus versus a train, right? We're all making these calculations, right? And so with that said, you're actually going to show in what ways we all experience public spaces differently. I'm going to ask you to share the number of experiences or identities you think of whenever you're in public space. Share the number of identities and experiences whenever you're in public space. If you are in person, I ask that you share it with a couple of people around you. If you are on Zoom, I ask that you put that in the chat. And I'm going to give us about 15 seconds. I already noticed a couple of heads turning in person. I also put down 5 for myself. Someone just messaged it to me. It looks like the number is 7, right? Like our numbers are different. And so I hope that, you know, being someone who has different numbers, we give each other and ourselves explicit grace to make sure that when someone does intervene, it's not simply because they're good people. It's because they feel capable to do so. And if someone does not intervene, that doesn't make them a bad person. They might not feel like they actually have the agency or the safety to intervene, right? And so give yourselves and other people some grace. So just letting you know some community guidelines, since we are here to talk about sensitive issues, do whatever it is you need to do to take care of yourself. There's going to be several ways in which we're going to be participatory. If you are online or via Zoom, there's the chat box that we're using. Make sure you click everyone when you are in the chat box. Otherwise, you're going to raise your hand. If you're here in person, I will also give you explicit instructions. A lot of that will have to do with you turning and talking to a person next to you. It doesn't matter the number of people you talk to. I just want to make sure that you talk to people. And the last thing is I ask that you do not take any screenshots, photos, recordings, and that has to do with proprietary reasons to our part. So thank you for respecting that. This is our second mini lesson. Since we are here to talk about anti-Asian sentiment, I think it's important for me to actually clarify who we are talking about when we're talking about anti-Asian sentiment. Who is Asian? Oftentimes when we're talking about people who are being attacked, we're talking about folks who look like me. We're talking about folks who live in Chinatown. And I want to be very clear here. I identify as East Asian. And the Asian diaspora is much more than people who look like me. So I always have to use a geography lesson for this. If you look on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen here, this is our geography lesson. East Asia comprises of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China. And again, it's not just East Asians we're talking about here. Southeast Asians have also been attacked during this time. Southeast Asia, like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Hmong folks. I also want us to recognize there's actually been a rise in South Asian hate that doesn't quite get reported on to the same frequency. South Asian folks oftentimes are Sikhs, sometimes they're Muslim, they're Indian, Pakistani, Nepalese, Sri Lankan folks. In addition, I think people oftentimes forget that the Middle East is technically Asia. It's otherwise known as Central and West Asia. And I hope that when we are talking about Muslim, Christian, Arab folks, we are also recognizing that they are a part of the anti-Asian sentiment issue that we have here in America. And the last thing, Pacific Islanders often get thrown into the mix of the Asian diaspora. We're looking at, as you can see in the backdrop here, the islands of Melanesia and Micronesia and Polynesia, even native Hawaii and some of our 16 territories of the United States. As you can imagine, the Asian diaspora is incredibly diverse. It's incredibly large. It's got the most countries, it's got the most languages, it's got the most people. It's a lot. And so with that, hopefully when we are talking about anti-Asian hate, we are talking about everyone who is considered Asian and Pacific Islander, rather than just focusing on the tragedy of a few. And so what I am going to ask you to talk about really quickly is, what are examples of anti-Asian, anti-Asian American, or xenophobic harassment that you've experienced or witnessed at any time in your life? As you can see right underneath it, To answer the questions, here are the instructions. If you're on Zoom, I'm going to ask you to answer the poll that I'm about to bring up. If you are here in person, I want you to think about the number of incidents or types of incidents that you've experienced or witnessed and share it with a person around you. So that being said, I am launching the poll and I'm going to give us 30 seconds to fill out the poll and or talk about it. So I believe you are now. And it looks like 70% of folks have noticed assumptions. Almost 2 out of every 3 of us have noticed jokes, staring. I also want to recognize that almost every single answer was selected on the poll. And for those of you who are here in person, we're looking at graffiti, we're looking at memes, online harassment, verbal harassment, not even going to certain businesses, staring, assuming people have the coronavirus, shaming, humiliation. This is all a lot. And many of us didn't see as many people during the pandemic, and yet we're noticing such a broad spectrum of harassment. And so I'm just going to ask you really quickly, if you are on Zoom, if you can use the raise your hand function, if you are here in person, if you can just raise a card, any card, do you know someone personally who has done the harassing? Please raise your hand. Cool. I see a couple folks actually like raise their hands in person. Yeah, and it looks like we have a couple of folks online who are doing so as well. And you can unraise your hands if you'd like. And I just want to say that's distressing. It's confusing, it's maddening. You know that it is wrong, but how do you have a conversation with someone you care about or love? And is doing these things. And I really just want to, hold space for that and say, I really feel for you. That's tough. How do you navigate and maneuver these kinds of conversations when you know someone is actively hurting people, whether they realize it or not? All of these actions that I had talked about in the poll, thinking about these harassment situations, this leads to our lesson that's about the spectrum of disrespect. It's otherwise known as the violence, cycle of violence, spectrum of harm, white supremacy culture. These are all phrases for the same thing. And that is the fact that all forms of harm and hurt are related to each other. All forms of harm and hurt are related to each other. But you don't need me to teach you how that's the case. I think you already know how that's the case. So this is what I'm going to ask you to do. You are going to pick 2 bullet points on this slide, ideally from different sections. Pick 2 bullet points from this slide, share how they're connected to each other. If you're on Zoom, do so in the chat. If you're in person, like I mentioned, turn and talk to someone near you. How are different actions related to one another? Come up with examples from this slide, and we'll do this about 30 seconds. So I mentioned in the chat that I've seen jokes literally come up as graffiti. And Elena, I hope you don't mind. I would love to get 1 volunteer from in person to share a connection they made. That means we might have to go off mute. Can we get 1 volunteer?
Kat, one moment.
It can easily jump from one of those to another, but like I feel like if someone is, you notice like they're usually doing microaggressions seems to be so like they don't even know it, and then it's
Yeah.
so natural for them at some point. It's weird naturalness, they go the other. For me, those things. And it seems to get more personal. Yeah. First it's like very generalized, then it's generalized, but like it's more emphasis and it's worse. And then it gets to the point where it just is to that point where you're single.
Right. Kat, I'm not sure if you were able to hear that, but there was a really great example shared, and they also acknowledged kind of the spectrum from left to right, how it gets kind of deeper and deeper harmful.
Totally. And I was able to capture some of it, but it sounds like we were talking about like generalizations and microaggressions as well, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, totally. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I know that in the chat, someone said like staring and verbal harassment, how does that like continue to make certain people feel uncomfortable? You know, when it comes to the, you know, the trends that I'm really glad that, you know, you were able to notice here, you know, just nonverbal forms of communication, those stereotypes, those assumptions, those generalizations, and those microaggressions, as you say, how does that turn into hateful speech, whether we know it or not? And how much does that shaming and humiliation and hateful speech turn into, as you say on the other end of the spectrum, like physical actions? And those physical actions create an unsafe power dynamic in which certain folks believe that they have the power to give and take away dignity of others. How dangerous is that, right? You know, and oftentimes when we like to share about, you know, the spectrum of disrespect, when it goes unchecked, we will quite literally legalize it. We will legalize different forms of hatred and hurt and bigotry. And the example we like to use is the Chinese Exclusion Act. This started in 1882. It lasted 60 years, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It excluded Chinese folks to coming here in the United States. I want to recognize that 1882 sounds like a long time, but I told you it lasted 60 years, which means that there are grandmas and grandpas who have lived during this time. And the other thing I would really like to highlight is the fact that the Chinese Exclusion Act is what we call legal precedent, right? For those of you who are like pre-law or are lawyers yourselves, something of the like. Legal precedent basically means that we take old laws and turn them into the best practices on how to handle that policy issue moving forward. The Chinese Exclusion Act basically legalized the idea that we can target immigration based on race and geography. Newsflash, immigration doesn't have to be handled that way. But it is the best practice of how the United States has handled immigration moving forward. We have targeted certain races for certain types of jobs. We have targeted certain geographic regions to be a priority or not a priority when it comes to immigration. And we continue to use bans based off of race and geographic location. Even in 2017, we had a Muslim ban in which 7 countries were targeted, as some of you may recall. This continues to recycle itself over and over again. So with that, I am going to have us experience the video.
This is not yet another ethnic oppression story. This is a very American story. The Chinese Exclusion Act forbid Chinese to immigrate to the United States, and those who were here were not allowed to become citizens. Chinese, they are so different. They're taking our jobs. They cannot become Americans.
There was no immigration policy before the Chinese came. So if you ask an American citizen, hey, when was it determined that if you're born here, you're an American? They would have just said, what do you mean? That's the oxygen we breathe. That must have been part of the Constitution. No. In 1898, it was decided that all persons born in the United States are United States citizens, no matter what. The Chinese Exclusion Act was blatantly unconstitutional.
It reflects how America saw itself at one time and how it continues to see itself. Some of it has to do with the fact that we excluded Chinese for 60 years.
This history really is the beginning of where we are today. The issues we're asking, who can come and who cannot come? Who can be American?
Another example of what happens when we allow this spectrum of disrespect to continue, when we don't nip supremacy culture in the bud, is the case of Vincent Chin. This happened in the 1980s. This happened in Detroit. This is what I want you to pay attention to. In this video, I want you to look for what happens when stereotyping and scapegoating become the norm. I'll have us experience the video now.
Dip, 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 boom. Detroit, 1982 was the year the recession became depression.
They had this idea that Japan was taking over the American economy.
U.S. auto jobs being lost to Japanese manufacturers.
Choked by imports and fighting for survival, the American auto industry and its army have targeted Japan as a major source of its problems.
We are being shot at and shot up by the Japanese.
I said, if I were president of the United States for 2 months, I said I'd fix the Japanese like they've never been fixed.
Many of their verbal bullets aimed at the Japanese government and car makers have strayed off course and are hitting home instead.
Vincent Chin is Chinese American.
It was the day before his wedding, and he was just trying to have a good time, maybe get a drink. He's this young Chinese American guy.
These two white guys, Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz.
And we look out, and I see guys are fighting out there in the club.
Mr. Evans and Mr. Nitz jumped out from behind the truck.
Mr. Evans swung a bat, repeatedly striking Mr. Chin.
The man was a goner.
And in what outraged the Asian community, both escaped a 15-year prison term.
Yeah, we all were surprised that they didn't come to us and ask us what happened.
Didn't you have then the responsibility to ask for the other side of the case before you handed down the sentence?
Bill, I am the presiding judge in the criminal division of the Wayne Circuit Court. I have approximately 50 sentences every week.
When you have two police officers as eyewitnesses to any type of crime, I believe both officers should have been notified for court. Both officers should have went to court.
The only thing that really bugs me is that the response, especially from people in the legal community, has been that these things happen all the time.
In light of how many people go out of their way to antagonize people that look different than them, at least in this part of the country, it's surprising that there hasn't been more than one Vincent Chin incident.
Almost a generation later, in what ways do we see Vincent Chin's story repeat itself today?
COVID-19, I said, that's an odd name. I could give you many, many names. Kung flu, yeah.
I called for help, but nobody came for help.
And also the mocking tone, the bullying, there's really no coincidence that that stoked and inflamed anti-Asian sentiment. And no matter how many contributions Asian Americans make to the United States, that our history isn't taught and that we're still perceived as foreigners or outsiders.
We need to be vigilant, even when it's not in the media headlines. What we're trying to do is disrupt the cycle of violence. Advancing Just Chicago is working on the issues, including police accountability, immigrant rights, language access, coalition building, and grassroots organizing.
I do want to recognize that the last video does hit heavy for some. If you'd like to share in the chat, or if you want to whisper to someone next to you about your reaction to the video, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, what I am going to ask you is to reflect on the fact that we've talked a lot about harassment itself, but now I want us to think about the impacts due to harassment. It's not just the harassment, it's also the aftermath of it that we also need to worry about. And so If you're not thinking about the reactions that you have of the videos, then I also want you to turn and talk to somebody if you're in person, or share on the Zoom. What's a bullet point here on this slide that you know about? What's a bullet point here on this slide you don't know about? You're either going to turn and talk and share with somebody, or you're going to share it into the Zoom chat. And what I really want us to think about is maybe there's a lot more impacts, a lot more negative aftermath than we originally thought. A bullet point you know, bullet point you don't know. Zoom chat or turn and talk. I'll give this a couple seconds. Someone said that they know about reduced mobility. How much does that also have to do with like reduced mobility, meaning segregation as well? Someone did also mention on chat that they don't know about lunchbox moments. I had mentioned that a lot of people don't actually know about our history of espionage and really scapegoating Chinese American and Taiwanese American scientists. If you were in person, I would love to hear from two people, things you know and don't know. Any takers in person?
I am trying to coax them.
Got it. I'm looking for two people.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Would one of you like to share, please? Sorry, can you speak a little bit louder? Okay, so they said they're not familiar with lunchbox. Is that one of the options?
Yeah, awesome. Okay, don't know about lunchbox moments. Sounds good.
And then maybe one from this end table? Yeah. Okay, he shared the bamboo ceiling. Sorry to cut you off. He's asking if it has another meaning other than being a literal bamboo ceiling.
Have you ever heard of this glass ceiling?
Sorry, can you say that again? Kat, can you say that again?
Have you ever heard of the glass ceiling?
He has not.
Got it. Well, that's my hint to you. So what I'm actually going to ask you to all to do is, I, as a facilitator, I'm actually not going to entertain any questions or answers. I know this seems kind of funky, and this is why. I'm glad that a lot of you do know something, that there's a lot of negative impacts because we allow harassment to happen. It also sounds like there's a lot that we don't know. We didn't realize how bad the situation is. And this is your homework if you want to take on the challenge. I actually want you to look up the history of pulling hijabs. I want you to look at the YouTube videos about lunchbox moments. I want you to look at the reports on the bamboo ceiling. I want you to look at these things in your own time. Go down that Wikipedia rabbit hole. Go check out those YouTube videos, because I want you to be the kind of person who doesn't just like need an answer from an expert on race and identity. You become a person who knows how to do this research on your own. So you don't become that person who's like, oh, I didn't know there was trauma based on race. I don't want you to be that person in a conversation. I want you to be the person who says, like, I did a little bit of my own research and I'd really like to talk about how we can really fix the bamboo ceiling in the institutions we're a part of. I want you to have those deeper conversations, and that's going to happen with your own efforts. You put in a little bit of your own work into it, and some of us like to go into that Instagram or TikTok spiral anyways for hours and hours at a time. It's going to be a wealth of information for you to research on, to have those deep and meaningful conversations. And maybe even amongst your friends, you realize that race and identity shows up in all aspects of our lives. And if it does, why don't we talk about it even more? So that's the challenge I have for you, to research one thing in your own time. I'm excited for you to actually look up the bamboo ceiling and be able to figure out wage disparities and how that relates to the glass ceiling. I'm excited for you to learn about lunchbox moments. I'm excited for you to have these conversations with people you know. And hopefully, getting sort of some of that teaser of the immense amount of negative impacts because we allow harassment to happen means that you are needed to intervene in situations. You are needed to intervene in situations. And so with that, these are the 5 tools you're going to be learning about today: distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. And so with that, I want to talk very quickly about safety before I go into the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. Because a lot of times you might not act, or I might not act, because we don't feel safe, right? So here's the number one thing. Your personal safety is the number one priority in any and every given situation. And there's some folks who say, I don't actually know what that means. If you're not sure what it means to prioritize your own safety, can you please raise your hand if you've ever felt the spidey sense? Raise your hand in person or raise your hand on Zoom. I see some people raising their hands in the background. Beautiful. Yeah, I love that I don't even need to explain it, right? It's like that. The behind you, mental radar goes off. You can lower your hands. Thank you for that. Otherwise, have you felt physical sensations of danger, panic, anxiety? Maybe this means the pit in your stomach, your mouth gets dry, the blood drains from your face, cold sweat that gets off of your forehead, the hairs raised on your back. You notice you're traveling a little bit quicker. You're darting your eyes. You're clutching your keys and your phone. Can you raise your hand if you've ever felt these kinds of physical sensations of danger and anxiety? Okay, cool. Yeah, it looks like there's quite a few folks in person. Yep, definitely. Your spidey senses and your physical sensations of danger. That's telling you to stay safe. I want you to actually feel those things, recognize it. When it comes to online harassment, you never know what's going to happen, regardless of whether or not you're online. So we say, don't directly intervene unless you know the person in actuality. If you're a note taker, I ask that you write this down. Otherwise, it's going to be in the post-training email. iHeartMob.org and StandAgainstHatred.org. These are 2 websites I'm going to ask you to be using regularly in order for you to write down and report experiences of harassment. Here's why I'm asking you to be in this work. You're here already, right? You know that this is an important issue. You know that it affects people around you. Maybe it affects you yourself. The other thing that I also want to highlight is the fact that we are no longer getting the same amount of news coverage about the fact that there has been a rise in hate crimes and hate incidents. And we need to continue to put the pressure on our governments and our systems in order for us to prove that these are community issues. We can't do that if we don't have the numbers and data to support that. So we ask that you actually use these websites, iHeartMob.org and StandAgainstHatred.org, to continue to report incidents so we can prove that this is a priority for us. If you're a note taker, it's a great time to take notes. Of the 5 Ds, 4 of them are indirect forms of intervention because we recognize that safety is a real issue. Number 1, here's the tool. This is distract. You are cutting the energy and attention away from the person who's doing the harassing. The person who's doing the harassing wants attention, so it's the one thing you're not going to give them. And a way to distract is either through verbal or nonverbal ways to do so. Nonverbal ways usually come in the form of sound. You press the panic button on your car. You pretend your phone is broken and the alarm just keeps ringing. You drop your backpack, you drop your coffee, and everything spills around everywhere. You scream because there's a rat or a spider on the bus. You scream because there's gum stuck to your shoe. Something along these lines, right? Nonverbal ways to just cut that energy and attention away from the person who's doing the harassing. Otherwise, there are verbal ways to do it. Excuse me, I'm so lost. Can you tell me where the nearest Walgreens is? Whenever you are doing verbal distractions, make sure that it's only towards the person who's been harassed. You're not paying any attention to the person who's doing the harassing. You can pretend they're your friend. Oh my God, Dana, it is so great to see you again. I was actually going to go grab a coffee from Starbucks. Will you come with me? Dana is not even their name. You just made up a name, but you're showcasing safety in numbers and you're giving them a physical way out by inviting them to coffee with you. You can even say something like, I love your shoes. Where did you get them? I was thinking about getting some shoes for my cousin on Black Friday. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Online, let's say you're noticing some bigoted chain conversation happening. I want you to troll it. Ideally in a PC manner. We're not trying to fight racism with more racism here. When you're trolling online, I want you to be really harmless about it. You're noticing some bigotry, and then you're gonna add every element from the periodic table into the conversation. You're gonna add every possible GIF or meme of SpongeBob SquarePants you can find on Google Images. You're going to find 5 different facts about the pink dolphins of Taiwan, and you're going to share it into the conversation. You're basically just being so random that you kind of become a buzzkill, and it becomes hard to track what the conversation's even about. The second of the 5 Ds is to delegate. You're getting help from somebody else. I notice that when I'm much more specific, people are much more likely to do what I ask. So instead of saying, excuse me, can you please help? I'll say something like, can you please go get the store clerk to come here? When I'm talking to someone, they know what I'm all about. They know what I'm asking for. They're kind of trying to calculate whether or not they have the capacity to get the store clerk. And once they actually get the store clerk, they themselves can also exit the situation. Online, consider reporting harassment to the moderator or to the platform, while also recognizing that many algorithms in social media are incredibly racist and bigoted and ableist and sexist, but it's the best answer we have. And the last thing is, people always ask, is calling the police a form of delegation? It is. But I want you to think about some things in mind. Number 1, I want you to think about consent. Verbally get consent from the person who is being harassed, whether or not they want the police to be called. Please follow their wishes. Number 2, there's many marginalized groups who are effectively harmed by policing. I think it's no secret that those in the Black and African American community are systemically harmed, abused, and killed by police systems. People who are undocumented, some of them have been successfully deported if police are working with ICE. Those with disabilities are 16 times more likely to get shot. Those who are Muslim have reported surveillance and physical altercations. Even those with heavy accents have reported the same things. 2 out of every 3 non-binary and trans people have reported verbal and physical harassment from those who are police. There's a lot that I want you to think about. Ask yourself, is there anyone who could potentially be harmed in this situation? The third, I want you to think about unarmed authority. Are there club bouncers nearby? Is there a store clerk or a parking attendant or a firehouse you can go to? Is there like a private security officer outside of like fancy stores or banks or ATMs? I want you to think about those folks, maybe restaurant managers, librarians, teachers. Are there unarmed authority you can go to during this time? And the last thing I want you to think about is this. Is this going to escalate or de-escalate if I bring in the police? And I want the answer to be de-escalate. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you to think twice. Consent, nuance, unarmed authority, escalate or de-escalate. The third of the 5 Ds is to document. You're taking your phone, screenshots, photos, videos. You're going to save it onto your camera roll. You're going to give it to the person who was harassed. What would you like me to do with this footage? You're getting that consent and you're saving it onto your camera roll so social media websites and platforms won't be able to flag your content or take it down. And the last thing here is, this doesn't always feel like you're de-escalating a situation. So if you can, do document with another one of the 5 Ds at the same time so it really does feel like you are trying to de-escalate here. The last indirect form of intervention is to delay. You are checking in with somebody after the situation has occurred. Think about what ways you support or console people. I will tell you the way that I do it. It's up to you whether or not you want to adopt it. I say a validating statement. I share some specific questions. A validating statement would be like, I am so sorry that happened to you. It looks very uncomfortable and unsafe. And that was very hurtful. Just to validate that what they went through is scary and legitimate, and they are perfectly valid in the way that they reacted. Series of specific questions right after. Raise your hand if you've ever felt really distraught in a situation. You know you need help, but you have no idea what kind of help you need. Raise your hand if you've ever felt that way. Okay, it looks like there's a couple of us. Yep. And that's why I don't ask, how can I help you? That's why I ask a series of specific questions. The person who just went through a very scary situation might not actually know how they can be supported in this moment. So what I'm going to ask you to do is share something like, do you want me to call an Uber or Lyft for you? Do you need me to get you a bottle of water? Can I call someone for you? Right? Like these are like very quick questions with yes or no answers. Like, yes, I need a hug. Please don't call anyone, right? They're in the conversation with you. You're giving suggestions while still giving them the agency to think about it. Online, do it privately rather than publicly. And the last thing, thumbs up, thumbs down, knowing glance, nod to the head, come over here. These are really good universal tools to delay, especially if you do not know if you speak the same language as the person who was harassed. And then we have direct. This is the only time in which you pay attention to the person who's doing the harassing. You name what is happening, like you are leaning into this woman. You tell them to stop, and then you get out of there, ideally with the person who is being harassed. You're not here to make an argument, a debate, a judgment call, to tell them they're racist. This is not a time to do any of that stuff. You're trying to de-escalate the situation, which is why I'm literally telling you to just factually describe what is happening rather than trying to make a judgment call there. And like I had mentioned, online intervention does not work best unless you know the person in actuality. So here's the last. I want you to think about your superpower. And if you are in person, please turn and talk to somebody. Which one did you gravitate to the most? Otherwise, if you are on Zoom, I want you to fill out this poll. Which of the 5 Ds did you really gravitate to the most? All right, and let's see what we got. It looks like many of us would choose distract or delay. Totally. And it might depend on your situation. There's no one of the 5 Ds that's better than the other. It depends on your identities and experiences. Every answer is valid. So just as a quick recap, be a good bystander means you are looking at something happening. You're then going to feel those spidey senses and those physical sensations, and then you're going to decide which of the 5 Ds works for you. So here is our practice. Scenario number 1. My family and I, we went to a local park to practice hitting tennis balls. There were 3 teens on bikes and scooters. They start yelling, "You mother effer, you got corona, F you, F you." Then they speed by and do the same thing to an Asian American family. What would you do? Would you document? A. Would you delay and check in with the family? B. Would you directly yell at the kids on the bikes? C. Or something else? If you are in person, pick the card, pick the letter that you would choose and raise it up in the air for people to see around you. If you are on Zoom, I'm going to ask you to share it into the poll here. Everyone, you have 7 seconds to make your decision. Let's see what we got. Cool, it looks like I'm already seeing some cards here. It looks like some people are in the polls. All right, all right, all right. The cards I can't see, so make sure that people around you can see them. Beautiful, and let's see what we got. Cool, document and delay were kind of even, at least on the poll end. Scenario number 2, your friend James on Facebook says, haha, so true, on a racist anti-Asian meme. Your mutual friend Angie explains how the meme is harmful. And then James says, it's just a joke, don't be so sensitive. What would you do? Would you direct and talk to James? A. Would you delay, talk to Angie? B. Would you delegate and talk to a friend to talk to James for you? C. Or something else? I want you to take 7 seconds. What would you do? Show the cards around you, fill out in the poll. Let's see what we got. Cool. I see some cards. I see some polls. Ending the poll right now. And it looks like direct and delay are pretty even. I have one last scenario for you. I'm going to skip around really quickly. And that is, oh, never mind. I'm going to go to this one. You witness an Asian American teen getting beaten up by a group of other people on the train. You're alone. You do not feel safe. What would you do? Would you A, delegate, find a station agent? Would you B, delegate 911 and then document on your phone? Would you C, distract, stand in front of the train door so nothing happens? Or D, something else? Pick your cards. Otherwise, I'm launching the poll. 7 seconds. Show the cards around you once you got it. Okay. Oh, wow. This is like really even on the online end. So it looks like many of us would delegate and document. And just wanted to let you know, when it comes to calling 911, even just for medical assistance, that has still resulted in murder by law enforcement. If you were going to call 911 to get medical assistance, actually just state the medical assistance. Don't share what's happening. Just describe the injury. Otherwise, the victim and the perpetrator situation is what the dispatcher focuses on. So that's all I have for us. And we might have like time for like just 1 or 2 questions here. I want to let you know, thank you so much for being here. We're going to send you some resources. You know, oftentimes when you're intervening, you become a person who is also the hub of resources. So we're going to send that to you in a post-training email. In the post-training email, we're also going to give you some calls to action. You probably already know that we did not solve racism in 1 hour. There's a lot more work for us to continue to be a part of. We're going to give you some suggestions to do that. And I know that we are also in, you know, sort of a hybrid mode. So if you have any questions or have any comments, please share that in the Zoom chat. Otherwise, it looks like Cynthia and Elena are going to help me field questions in person. So are there any questions or comments that we have with the few minutes that we have left together?
Thank you so much, Kat. Let me open it to the room. I know that no one filled out a question card, but was there a question that came to mind in closing from anyone in the room?
Or even comments. That's totally fine as well.
Right, or a comment or feedback.
I know Nancy had said having specific ways to intervene is helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Nancy. I'm really glad that there are people who are able to think that there are tangible things we can take out of this. Anyone else?
No one is sharing a question here in the room.
Okay, sounds good. Are there any comments or reflections of the people in the room?
Better ways about how to intervene.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you caught that, Kat, but just a comment in regard to it being really useful to go through the specific situations and think through how we would react in those spaces.
I appreciate that. Otherwise, I believe it is time. And I just want to say thank you all so much for your grace in being cool with this hybrid way of being able to engage. I am really excited for you to be using these tools in any and every situation possible. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, how much I appreciate this being a reality, you being here because you thought of it as a priority. And I wish you the best of luck in using these tools. And I hope you all have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much, Kat, for being here today and speaking to the room online and also in person. I just want to say thank you to everyone here, and I hope to see you all next week. Also, if you get a chance to fill out the evaluation via the QR code that was at your seat, that would be super helpful as we round out the series. Thank you so much. Have a great day.